Yatirajaya Vivekanandasure Satchet Sukhasvarupaya Swamine Tapaharine. So we were discussing this lecture of Vivekananda called Realization, which is essentially his rendition of at least half of the Kathopanishad. And today we will not really read from the text per se, because we had finished essentially the free translation of the part where Vivekananda freely translates the Kathopanishad. Instead, there was a rather interesting set of questions that were sent along, which refer to other passages, and we'll address that. So I'll read out this set of questions by one Mr. Suresh Saha. This is what he says. It was not clear to me in your discussion of Kathopanishad verse 1.3.13 how the absorption of the speech and mind into the intellect, the absorption of the intellect into the pure faculty of knowledge, and of that into the universal principle of knowledge is to be achieved. Am I correct in understanding that methods discussed earlier, like doing everything with full awareness, or equivalently being mindful or being aware of the presence of God, or any other devotional practices for that matter, will help/lead one to achieve this? Could you kindly elaborate on this? This is the first set of questions. Essentially, what is being asked is, what are the practical methods of achieving or going towards the goal that is set out in the Kathopanishad? The second paragraph, it gives some cross-references, says, also, am I correct in thinking that there is some similarity between verse 1.3.13 of the Kathopanishad and A, verses 3.42 and 3.43 of the Bhagavad Gita, and B, perhaps verses 2.2.3 and 2.2.4 of the Mundakopanishad? The reason behind asking this question is that I have come across the above mentioned Bhagavad Gita and Mundakopanishad verses before and have been puzzled as to how what they say is to be achieved in practice. So I wanted to confirm whether the ways of trying to practically implement these Bhagavad Gita and Mundakopanishad verses is the same/similar to that for verse 1.3.13 of the Kathopanishad. All right. It's a very, very interesting question. Extremely, it's a penetrating question. So what we'll do is, there are a couple of references given here. What we'll do is first read out for your benefit the original verses from the Bhagavad Gita and the Mundakopanishad. The verse from the Kathopanishad that is being referred to, namely 1.3.13, is basically this verse, Yachet Vang Manasi Pragya Tad Yachet Jnana Atmani Jnana Atma Mahati Niyachet Tad Yachet Shanta Atmani. Yachet, this has been more or less appropriately translated here. Yachet Vak Manasi. This is a literal translation. Vak is speech, Manasi is mind, into the Yachet Vak Manasi Pragya. Pragya here is intellect. Tad Yachet Jnana Atmani. And then that is to be absorbed into the faculty of pure knowledge, Jnana Atmani. Jnana Atma Mahati Niyachet. Mahat is the universal principle of knowledge. Tad Yachet Shanta Atmani. Shanta Atmani means the pure consciousness without a second, where there is no disturbance. This is the verse, and what is being asked for are practical means of going towards the goal that is being talked about. And the question that's being asked in the first paragraph, is it essentially just this, mindfulness and full alertness in action, or equivalently the practice of the presence of God, or is there something else? This is the question that is being asked here. And then the cross references to Mundakopanishad and the Bhagavad Gita. So what are the verses that are being referred to? Again, so what we'll do is, we'll first set out the framework in terms of the theory, which means essentially the verses of the Bhagavad Gita and the Mundakopanishad. What exactly is the relationship between these and the particular verse of the Kathopanishad that is referred to here? And finally, we'll come to what exactly is the practice that is entailed. The practice is actually hinted at in these verses, and so we'll elaborate a bit on that. So what are the corresponding verses from the Bhagavad Gita? Indriyani paranyahu indriyebhya param manaha manasastu para buddhi yo buddhe paratastu saha. So here it's slightly different, but it's essentially the intent is the same. Indriyani paranyahu. Yeah, so these pranas, or that means the vital force that keeps the organs, the sense organs active, is superior to the sense organs themselves. Indriyebhya param manaha, superior to that is the mind, manasas, and beyond that mind is the intellect, and finally, yo buddhe parataha. So that is our goal. And then the second verse of the Bhagavad Gita itself really gives you the practice. Evam buddhef param buddhva sangstyabhyatmanam atmana. Buddhe param buddhva. See, the first set of things here, it's basically saying that, look, there are these, when we start analyzing the subjective entity, that means what we call ourselves in a fairly confused way, when we start analyzing to gain clarity, then there is a progressive level of subtlety, refinement, that as layers of ourselves that we go through. The first thing, between what we call the external world and what we call ourselves, the first doors are the senses. But then we start asking ourselves, are the senses conscious in and of themselves? And then we see, no, the senses are really activated by this vital forces that act within us, the life force that acts within us, and that's called prana. And then that it in turn is directed by the mind is directed by the buddhi, or the unified intellect, where emotions, willing, and cognition get unified. It's a kind of a universal way of analyzing the subject. And then what is the practice? This is basically what we find is that this decisive faculty, or the discriminatory faculty, that which differentiates and that which decides, this faculty, this functionality of the mind is what's called the intellect. Sthiratmika, which nishchayatmika buddhi, that which determines clearly. But that too is a faculty of the mind. And we ask ourselves, where is this coming from? And somehow, the cause of that, in the sense, where do these decisions in our mind spring from? That unifying faculty is the faculty of consciousness itself, in which all these things get unified. Evam buddhef param, that which is beyond the buddhi, buddhva, knowing that how? Knowing that as the essence of one's being. So this subjective enquiry is to be targeted towards this. Not the reason why we divide the mind into these various layers is what is superficial, what is slightly deeper, what is still deeper, and what is the deepest that we can plumb in terms of our subjective psyche. That is the question being asked and answered here. And there is no real separate functionality of that which is beyond the intellect. So, knowing that is good enough. Knowing that how, as the essence of one's own being, as one's self. Knowing that in this particular way, what happens? Sangstabhya atmanam atmana. Using that, one restrains the empirical I, restrains all these outward projecting forces that act through our senses and vital forces, by the knowledge of this essence of one's being, which is unconditioned. That knowledge itself, if it is known with in term as oneself, basically knowing with one's full being, so to speak, knowing it in that way automatically casts a restraint on these more superficial aspects. Why? Because somehow one has found a deeper source for all that is satisfactory in life in the core of one's own being. Joy, truth, knowledge, and existence itself. Catching hold of this aspect of one's being, which is unconditioned, automatically appeals to us as something that is much more valuable than these little fragmentary realities that we catch hold of in terms of our senses. So this, knowing it that way, sangstabhya atmanam atmana, jahishatrum mahabahu kamarupam durasadam. So basically these little fragmented desires which project our senses and minds outward, essentially to convincing ourselves that, oh, there is this satisfaction that we can get from outside. And then once one starts analyzing and one understands that no, this source of satisfaction, the source of meaningfulness is within ourselves. There is nothing really of intrinsic value outside. This clarity of understanding immediately makes the outward directed faculties of the mind cease. Why? Because, if one has known that there is something that is just as valuable as dust there, the mind is not going to go towards it. In other words, see, what happens is the following. When we direct our attention and look at the world, this world is granted reality by the focus of our attention on it. It's when we focus our attention on these various things around us, this focusing of attention automatically brings with it this sense of what is called technically reification, granting of reality. Focus of attention, a subjective faculty, leads or is coexistent with this sense of reality that we grant it. But when we start focusing on this faculty itself, then we start understanding that the object of cognition was not real in any fundamental sense, but the sense of reality was granted to it by this inner faculty. And if we can separate these two out, this is what's called Viveka. If we separate these two out, then that which is the source of all value is identified as the essence of one's own being, and the rest of the world on which we had focused our attention loses value in and of itself. So this is so therefore what happens? This desire for these little fragmented things, that goes away. So this is a this is some kind of a translation of these two verses of the Bhagavad Gita which were referred to in this letter. Let's now come to the two verses of the Mundaka Upanishad which have been referred to there, because that refers to in some form to a practice. It is a kind of an upasana that is being referred to. Let's read out and you can judge for yourself. Dhanur grihitva. This is I think this 2.2.3 of the Mundaka Upanishad. Dhanur grihitva Upanishadam mahastram sharam hi upasa nishitang sandhayita ayamya tadbhava gatena chetasa lakshyam tadeva aksharam somya vidhi. Here it's a certain imagery that is being put forward. Dhanu, it means the bow. Yeah? The bow is what? The dhanur grihitva. Having caught hold of the bow, which bow? Upanishadam. That means the Upanishads and their essential knowledge content is regarded as the bow. As the bow meaning the basis on which the arrow will be loaded. The arrow here is what? Grihitva Upanishadam Mahasam Sharam. What is that arrow? Hi upasa nishitam sandhayita. That arrow is our internal faculty. Based on the truths of the Upanishad and keeping that mind sharpened and one-pointed by what? Upasa. Through this upasana or focusing of attention. That is what is sharpening and making the mind subtle and penetrating. Ayamya. But just putting the arrow on the bow is not enough. Then one has to stretch the string. How is that done? Ayamya tad bhava gatena chetasa. Bhava is the attitude, understanding, deeper feelings which these verses evoke in us. That subjective awareness, unification of cognition, willing and feeling, that unified spirit is what allows us to pull this string, pull this mind towards that focus. Ayamya tadbhava gatena chetasa. Then where should we point that arrow? Lakshyam tat eva aksharam saumya vidhi. Aksharam is that which has no change. What is the mind trying to do? It is really trying to go beyond this framework of time, space, and particularly causality. Wherein do these frameworks spring from? And therefore one is, if this is kshara, that which changes, the opposite of that is akshara, that which does not change, that which is not subject to space, time, and causation, and that therefore is the goal. This is what is being taught as the principle of practice. Okay? And then the practice itself, pranavo dhanuhu. Again, similar, but here pranava or onkara, Upanishadam pranava. That is the dhanuhu or the bow. Sharohi atma. Here atma does not mean the unconditioned self, it's the empirical self. This empirical embodied sense of I, mind and body, is the arrow which we load on this pranava. And Brahma tallaksham uchyate. In the earlier verse it was akshara. Akshara is what refers to Brahman or that which is unconditioned, all encompassing. Bringhanath Brahman, or great and large. And then how is the practice to be done? Apramattena vedhavyam. Apramattena. Pramada is in the Mahabharata there is something called the Sanat Sujatiya Samvad. In it there's this thing, pramado vai mrittu. Pramada is forgetfulness. Forgetfulness means essentially a mindless living. Yeah? Unfocused, without clarity in our minds about where we are headed. Opposite of that is apramada, clarity of intent, focusing the mind. When one is doing some work, full attention given to it. That is this apramada. And so through this apramada, what is to be done? Apramattena vedhavyam. In this manner of non-forgetfulness, vedhavyam, the target is to be hit or penetrated. Vedhavyam. And once that target is reached, what then? Sharavat. Shara is this arrow. Shara, when the arrow meets and reaches the target, what does it? It becomes one with the target. That is the analogy that is being given here. Sharavat tat mayo bhavet. Tanmayo bhavet. Become one with the goal itself. This is the same thing as very perspicaciously pointed out by Mr. Saha. This is exactly tad yachet shanta atmani. When this mind, which was the instrument of going towards the goal, has itself merged in the goal itself, and no separate mind exists after that. Okay? So now I think the theoretical portion of these two verses from the Bhagavad Gita and the two verses from the Mundaka Upanishad have been elucidated. Now we come back to the more important question which was asked. It says, am I correct in understanding that methods discussed earlier, like doing everything with full awareness or equivalently being mindful or being aware of the presence of God or any other devotional practices for that matter, will help/lead one to achieve this? Could you kindly elaborate on this? So we now have basically that these two verses from the Bhagavad Gita, this what we were talking about from the Kathopanishad last time, and these two verses from the Mundaka Upanishad are all extremely closely related. The rough or the broad lines of analogy are essentially that there are layers of our personality. Some layers are more superficial than others. And what we are to do is essentially, what makes something more superficial than something else? It's essentially, do we regard that as really valuable in the final count? And when the answer to that is no, well, what is more valuable, what is of greater value to us subjectively, is what grants level of superficiality or level of depth to some aspect of our being. Okay? And through these layers, the deepest aspect of our being is this profound understanding that there is no separate I, and the essential part of this individuated existence is nothing other than universal existence itself. And what happens then, the akshara, that which does not change, is identified, one's own self. Two ways of saying the same thing. The Jnani says that the individual self is identified with this cosmic notion of consciousness or self. And the devotee basically says that the I is lost or offered entirely up to the personal, up to what one calls a God. Yeah, so essentially, these two are basically talking of the same thing, but from two slightly different points of view. In either case, and the Buddhists talk about this shunyata, which basically keeps analyzing because they don't really have too much in terms of theological doctrines. So they keep talking about really analyzing our empirical self and seeing that it is bereft of substance in the final count. That bereftness of any real substance is what is called shunyata. Essentially, people are talking about various things depending on the path or point of view that they have adopted. Okay? So what is it that is necessary? as a day-to-day practice, it is completely true that the practice is exactly this, doing everything with full awareness or equivalently being mindful, or from in a devotional point of view, practicing the presence of God. Essentially, this is what is the day-to-day practice. However, there's a bit more involved. See, the two faculties that we need to distinguish in order to, two faculties of the mind that we need to distinguish in order to answer this question are A, awareness, just awareness, just being aware of all that is there happening outside me, inside me. Just clear awareness of that, no judgments. One part of the story. The other is focus. Focusing cannot be done without a choice. What is being focused on here? In different verses, the same truth that is being talked about. It's, see what one, so here the thing that is most explicitly stated is pranava, or omkara. So essentially this is a sound which is supposed to essentially indicate the entire process of creation, sustenance and dissolution. This is a word that symbolizes all that. But do we really feel with our whole being that that's what it is about? Or is it just some bunch of intellectual words that we play around with? And these concepts do not really influence the deeper aspects of our psyche. It's when we grasp this with our whole being that the mind is naturally interpreted as being focused on the truth content of it. So this focusing is what leads to this one conviction in one's field of awareness. Being aware of multiplicity is one step. That's what doing everything with full mind, full attention and mindfulness or practice of the presence of God is about. But when this variegated multiplicities cease and the essence of being is seen in and through every experience, pratibodha viditam matam amritatvam hi vindate. Kenopanishad. So amritatva, that which is not mortal is sought, but it is not just sought, it is seen as a living experience in every act of cognition, thought and feeling. What that means is that the mind has developed a capacity to cut through the external irrelevant stuff, the more superficial stuff, and get to the core of one's being. And that getting to the core of one's being is something that is practiced in and through every act of cognition, which means the mind not only is aware, but can be brought to a one-pointed, focused state, so that to our ordinary minds, these variegated parts of the universe keep coming and going, so that if I am directing my attention to the laptop, there is simultaneously a not direction of attention to the wall behind me. But here what is being talked about is that in this act, the key point is being aware, this consciousness itself. So when the attention of the mind is turned upon its own substratum, the mind turning inwards, so to speak, through deeper penetration and analysis, then the core of one's being is held in focus, unflinchingly, without external thoughts coming and going. And when that is held without any alternative, without anything else coming and disturbing it, that is the state of the mind being absorbed in this Shanta Atmani, which means, roughly, with all the esoteric stuff thrown aside, training the mind in two of these faculties. One, awareness. Two, attention. Full attention to one's action at the present moment is what develops this capacity for focusing, and at the same time being entirely aware, alert about what is going on around oneself, both internally, that means mind is throwing up various thoughts, and externally, which means the world is moving around us. This awareness and attention being cultivated is the practice. What ways can this be done? The Upanishad here has stated some. Pranavadhanu sharohyatma brahmatalaksham uchyate. Apramattena vedhavyam sharavat tanmayo bhavet. Here, the key point is apramada. This is the key hint towards our practice. Apramada, in it all these things are involved. Full attention to what one is doing. What happens? That external nonsense that comes and clutters the mind is for the time being wiped out. This is the secret of what is called Karma Yoga. Whenever one is doing something, it is being done with full attention. That means focused attention on that present thing. And then one leaves it fully and just becomes aware that, oh, there are other things. And then one focuses on something else. It's cultivating this aspect, this capacity of our minds, cultivating it consciously with full alertness. That's the practice. So, yes, to an extent, it is doing everything with full awareness or being mindful. Yes, that is certainly an aspect, but I think these verses stress simultaneously the capacity to focus our minds and exclude noise. Yeah? I'll just give an analogy. So I think many of you might have heard that there is this, there are these things called, there's this big data, something called big data has been creating a buzz for a long time. So what exactly is it about? It's really about this, that say for example, a hospital churns out huge amounts of data. What do we want to hunt for? If you had all that data, it's not possible for an individual human being to process all that data. So what do? We pass it through a machine, and what one is asking, or through a computer, what one is asking is, what is relevant, what is meaningful to us in all this data? Essentially, it's the metaphor is hunting for a needle in the haystack. The haystack is rubbish, irrelevant to us. The needle is useful. The more precise way of saying it is hunting for the signal in the presence of noise. And so there's a way of formalizing it. I mean, there are lots and lots of parameters, some millions of them, but maybe out of that, some 100 parameters would be important. What this process does is that it hunts out for that which is significant in this huge amount of noise. So this is trying to translate this capacity for human attention, which removes noise and focuses on the signal, and trying to objectify that as a faculty that artificial intelligence or these large language models or the big data, the science of big data, that's the key purpose that they are trying to serve. What we are doing here is doing exactly the same thing, but here the noise is created by our own minds. And when we hunt for a signal, we are asking ourselves, yes, in this moment, of traveling and going from here to there, of studying and eating and doing various other bits and pieces of our acts through the day, what really is valuable? What is it that is not going to be destroyed? What is eternal? What is really true about this? What is really meaningful about all this? And that question cannot be answered in terms of some idle armchair theoretical framework. One has to do, one has to act on the basis of that. And that action is what practice is about. And what is that practice? It's basically saying, okay, there, see, we cannot but think except in terms of symbols. Even words are symbols. When we say cat or dog or camel or goat, whatever it is, the word is not the animal. They are symbols that point to an external reality. Similarly, when we refer to a personal God, it's a symbol for something that is real and experienced in one's subjective experience, as part and parcel of one's subjective experience. And catching hold of that is what one is trying to do here through these two faculties of awareness on the one hand and attention on the other. So I hope this clarifies the questions that were asked over email, and it's much too late to start off again on the lecture, so we'll pause here and we'll return next time to the lecture on realization again. Om Shanti 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 Hari Om Tat Sat Shri Ramakrishna Arpanamastu.